I think it's pretty safe to say that every year there are more and more game developers. Maybe you're one of those people who has been playing video games for the past 10 years or whatever. It's like what you grew up with. And now you're like, I want to make my own games because I saw that Brackeys got back and making games is easier and cheaper than ever. Let me jump into it as well, but chances are that you don't have a complete understanding yet of how game development works. And with that, there are a lot of misconceptions that I see as well when I talk to other game developers about getting started as a game developer. So in this video, I want to dispel 5 common misconceptions that I see other starting game developers do that are either holding them back from starting game development or are immediately setting them up for failure when they get started on that first game. And one of the first big examples of one of these things that is immediately kneecapping you is looking at a game and you create your little game design document and whatever, and the first thing you decide when you're making a game is this game is gonna be 6 hours or 8 hours long or whatever. That's pretty much the most common numbers I see, where people they're not even sure yet what their game's gonna be, what their mechanic is gonna be often. They just know like, oh, it's gonna be a racing game or it's gonna be a shooter game or whatever. And I want it to be 6 to 8 hours because that is generally where I feel like people will start paying money for my game. And they focus so hard on game length without ever having even made like a 10-minute slice of their game or like tried out of a mechanic. And I need to tell this to you, making your game longer is hard. And honestly, you think you should be already quite happy if your first game is like 2 to 4 hours at most. And I don't think you should aim even for specific times of how long should I play. There are plenty of great games that can be beaten in just 1 or 2 hours. And depending on the price, people don't really care that often. Of course, you have the thing of like, hey, if my game is under 2 hours, what about people refunding my game within like the 2-hour period? And it's like, sure, you will have some of those people probably, but it's not going to make or break your game development career, honestly, because Steam also does some like fraud prevention with those refunds as well. And there will always be people who refund your game. There will always be people who pirate your game. At the end of the day, it's much better to focus on making a game that is just fun to begin with in those first 2 hours versus trying to make some mediocre game at best that is like, sure, it reaches an 8-hour gameplay mark, but nobody wants to play it for 8 hours because it's just not fun, because your core focus was on padding out the content so you could get to that imaginary number of 8 hours. So don't get stuck at looking at how long is my game going to be. Of course, depending on the genre you go for, like for example, if you want to go for a sandbox game or a like survivor-like or a roguelike, it is going to be easier to get a longer game versus if you're making a linear narrative-based game. Those things are going to be much harder to make like 8 hours long because you don't have any replayability. But regardless of what genre you're going for, don't look blindly at this game is going to give this many hours of content. You can't tell that in the beginning of your development process anyway. And then of course, another one of the most common misconceptions that I often see with starting game developers, it's also like our most popular video on this YouTube channel, I think, is what engine should I pick? And why do people care so much? Because changing engine once you've committed and you're like a few months into your game's development process is not something you can easily undo. Once you've developed multiple months in like Unreal or something, suddenly changing gears and going to Godot isn't as easy. And it feels like there's a lot of pressure on picking the right engine from the first time. But I'm gonna tell you something. There is no such thing as a right engine. You can make pretty much any game in any engine. And of course, certain genres and visual styles will have affinities with certain engines, for example. If you want to make a very like realistic and beautiful game, you can probably get started more easily in Unreal versus in something like a Godot, where like 3D performance, sure, it is there. You can make 3D games in Godot, but it's simply not as easy as using Unreal Engine, for example. Now, there are 2 things that I would say if you are looking at, okay, what engine should I go for? And that first one is, what is your like technical prior knowledge? For example, if you're a software dev in your main job and you work in C#, well, probably it's gonna be easier to switch to Unity versus if you are a C++ programmer, then go for something like Unreal, for example. That is one thing, or maybe you're an artist and you have an art pipeline that is more geared towards a specific engine. In which case, yeah, the decision is made pretty easily for you, but otherwise I wouldn't really worry about it too much. One thing you can also do is just prototype, like follow some tutorials for the 3 different engines, the 3 big ones, Unreal, Godot, and Unity, and then decide based on that, like spend a week or so making like a very simple clone of a other game or following a tutorial and figuring out which one do you have the most affinity for. Because I have people who are like, oh, I can never use Unreal because it keeps crashing on me, or I can never use Unity because it keeps crashing on me. Whereas other people are like, I have no problems with this engine. That is something that you need to figure out for yourself, and there's no point in just pondering and always looking at, oh, Godot released a new update, Unity is releasing Unity 6, maybe I should go for that. It doesn't matter. Don't go for games with long ass development cycles to begin with, and then the engine also doesn't matter as much. And then something else I see is that developers, they start working on their game and they're focused purely on making the game and nothing on the marketing at all. Like months in advance you should start already. And when I ask them like, why are you not focusing on marketing? Why do you still not have a Steam page? Why haven't you reached out to anyone? They're like, oh yeah, I don't really need to care about marketing that much because a good game will sell itself at the end of the day, right? And I mean, technically, maybe you're not wrong, but on the other hand, we're living in a climate where so many games are being released every day. It's like 10 or 20 games every day at least that are released on Steam that are just the indies. And it's getting harder and harder to just organically stand out with those. And sure, having a good game is going to make it much easier to market when you have things like a demo, for example. People will talk about it, people will love it, but you still need to build up that initial momentum of people who play the game and are like, this is the best game ever. Let me tell my friends about it or whatever. And you can't get that without doing any marketing. And you don't need to spend like thousands of dollars on advertisements and things like that. We made a video about how you can reach out to influencers for free, basically, getting them to cover your game. And if it truly is an amazing game, it shouldn't be that much of a problem to get people to cover your game. And then on the flip side, this is a misconception I see as well, and that you see a lot with like developers who mainly played AAA games before they went into game development is, oh, a bad game, I can still just market the hell out of it and it will still sell. Like, I don't need to worry too much that my gameplay isn't perfectly there. If I just get enough YouTubers to cover it or whatever, or I pay for some ads, it will pick up and then the ball will get rolling once some people buy it and it's gonna be okay. And also here, you're not fully wrong, especially with those AAA games. If you look at games like Overwatch 2, they're overwhelmingly negative, or like the Call of Duty games, they're very negatively reviewed, but still they sell so much because they just have big ass marketing budgets. But you probably don't have those. And another thing that I want you to keep in mind is even if you do have that marketing prowess to get a lot of eyeballs on your bad game, it still doesn't mean you're going to be successful. And I think, I have to be honest, the best example of this is Forge Industry, which is our own game. And we worked on that game for 18 months. We put a lot of effort into it, but at the end of the day, there are just some big mechanical issues with it. However, we got hundreds of thousands of views combined on like our videos where we plug it, and we've been able to sell Forge Industry as well. We've sold over $10,000 worth of it. But when the game just isn't fun, it doesn't matter how many people buy it, because also your refund rates will go up. So at the end of the day, you'll just not earn as much. You'll have to deal with seeing things like, oh, mixed reviews or negative reviews, which also hurt a lot. And once you've reached that mixed review on Steam, basically, your game becomes near impossible to sell. Even if I were to plug it in like every single video we make here and people would watch it and like do other advertising stuff. So having a bad game or having no marketing are both big mistakes. Ideally, you want to have a good game and also have a more thought out marketing approach where you start thinking about marketing months before you're actually planning on releasing. Now, what should you make as a good game? This is another one where a lot of people are like immediately overwhelmed when they start like planning out their first game, because they're like, it has to be original. And this is one of those things that a lot of developers feel like, oh, I need to have my games be completely unique, completely original, nothing else like that exists. And I know some of you guys commenters are like, oh, Marnix, you're just a soulless developer who just makes whatever, like, will earn the most money. And no, I don't think so, because I still don't have a Lamborghini, unfortunately. But also originality, when you're really getting started in game development, is actually going to hamper you more. Because first of all, you're still figuring out your engine that you still also aren't really committed on yet, what engine you're gonna take. And the originality will mean you're going to have weird mechanics, for example, weird movement systems or whatever, that you just don't have any references for. I think it's much better, especially with those first games, to take something that is already established, which is something that we kind of did with Forge Industry as well, where we took a game like Factorio, an automation game, And instead of being 100% original, we took that core concept of we have different buildings, we move items between the buildings, and we make new items and we sell them for profit, and that's the game. And we just added on top of that. We were like, okay, how do we change this and make it a bit different than everything else on the market by not using conveyor belts? So instead we had like little guys who would walk around and transport items using pot finding. And that combined with our setting was pretty much our originality. And sure, it wasn't the most original, but it allowed us as well to, when making that game and we weren't sure about like certain design decisions, look at games like Factorio, how do they implement things, and also more importantly, look at reviews of those games and figure out what people did and didn't like about it. That's also extremely important. If you're making something completely unique, you could be spending multiple years on a unique project that at the end of the day, when you do release it, nobody will understand. And because it is so extreme and unique, marketing also just isn't there because there's no anchor, is what it's called, like no frame of reference for the player to understand, oh, this is a shooter, but you have a chainsaw as a leg, for example. So don't get stuck on finding that original idea. Just expand onto something that already exists, in my opinion. And then the last misconception is one that we, once again, also fell victim to, and it is like, oh, I'm gonna make my game in like 1 to 3 months. That's my schedule. I think we still make this mistake to this day. Game development will always take much, much longer than you plan on it. When we started working on Forge Industry, we figured we would make it in about 1 month. It ended up taking 18 months. And honestly, if we really wanted to do it right, it probably should have taken 2 years. And okay, we had a big scope, I understand that. But you probably also have no idea what is a good scope and what is a bad scope. We actually made another video about that, like how you deal with scope creep and scoping your game correctly. So check that one out over there. But realize that if you want to make a game and it's not just a Flappy Bird clone, it is probably going to take at least 3 months, probably more like 6 months, if you want to make something that is more commercial grade and you can put on Steam, versus just a simple prototype. Because there's also just so much more that comes to play. It's not just making the mechanic, it's making all of the content, it's making all of the story. Because we talked about like how long your game should be in the beginning. Sure, if you have like a month time, you can probably make a game that's like 15-20 minutes long. But most likely you won't be able to make a game that reaches like, you know, the 1 or 2 hour mark, which is in my opinion a bit still the bare minimum for a Steam release. And also, if you're making a game in like 1 month, that gives you no time for marketing, because Steam also requires you to have your Steam page up 2 weeks before launch. So generally go into game development with the idea that, hey, this is going to take more time than I probably planned for, but that's okay. I don't need to like earn a profit from my games in like the next 3 months. As long as you understand that, you should be fine. So if you are on the fence of, hey, I want to get into game development, but I'm not really sure yet if it's for me or I can't commit, I hope this video has helped you a little bit more in understanding how the game dev world works, basically. It is something that, sure, there is a lot of unknowns. It is a lot of work to make a game, but at the end of the day, it is also still fun. There's a big difference as well, I need to say this, between making games and planning to earn money from it, or just making games as another fun hobby. If it's the latter, it is a really great hobby. If you're going at this purely for fun, then definitely it is a bit harder, but I hope this still helped clear things up. If there's anything else that you're like, hey, I want to get started with game development, but I don't know if it's going to be worth it for me, or you have anything else that is stopping you, leave a comment down below and I'll respond to it, probably dispelling it or giving you some more information about the problem that you're dealing with. I want to help you guys, because game development, like I said, it is nice, and I wish that I had someone like me when I started 2 years ago working on our own first games. So if you like this kind of content, talking about game development and the entire process about it, you're at the right channel. We make 2 videos every week talking about the process of being an indie game developer, the business behind it, the things that we personally learn along the way as well, the mistakes we make, so you don't have to make them like we did it, and you can just bypass a lot of the dumb fuck-ups, basically. If that's something that you're interested in, be sure to head down below and subscribe, as it really helps us out in knowing that you're interested in this kind of content, and you get these videos delivered to your subscription box 2 times a week. That's all I need to say. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!